Pat Kenny is our presenter today. She is a life member of the Herb Society and is a member of the Potomac unit. And Pat's been a member for almost 40 years now. She has a Helen de Conway Little Medal of Honor Award in 2015 and a Certificate of Achievement in 1993. But our topic today is sea vegetables and ocean herbs, nutrition for ourselves and our gardens. Pat really began learning about using sea vegetables in the 1970s when better health concerns turned her to more gardening and a macrobiotic cooking class. Over the years, she's seen the diets of many of her like-minded peers evolve to include a wider spectrum of the world's plants. More research has surfaced to support the healthful benefits of the edible plants of our coastal waters, and we can all make small culinary steps towards using these ancient sea plants sustainably harvested along the cold, clean shores of, for instance, our state of Maine. So, Pat, I'm really excited about this topic because it's not one I know a lot about, and looking forward to your presentation. So you may begin.
Thank you. Hello and welcome. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. Today we'll begin with a general introduction and then talk about 5 or 6 of my favorites and how to use them. Richard Wilbur, former U.S. Poet Laureate, once said, "All that we do is touched with ocean, yet we remain on the shore of what we know." Well, that's not us today. We're diving in. Join me in this communion. We came from the sea. Our blood and cellular fluids are similarly salty. Think of the primordial ooze. I guess that's where it all started. Algae, members of the most ancient plant families on Earth, became one of the first inhabitants and therefore one of the first foods. Algae's ability to transform the sea's water, the Earth's minerals with the sun's energy into organic carbohydrates, proteins, and fats provided the basic meal for all higher life forms. Yes, I said fats. You can look at the nutritional contents of the seaweeds we talk about in the book called Seaweeds, Edible, Available, and Sustainable by Ole Moritzen, 2013, listed in the handout. Imagine a plant without roots, leaves, and flowers or seeds. What remains are cells containing chlorophyll, and that's a rough and ready definition of algae. Algae are dominant aquatic flora in marine habitats. Many have complex reproductive cell cycles, but they're usually simpler in structure than the higher seed-producing land plants. Some are microscopic or nearly so. You've heard of plankton. It's considered the most important marine vegetation in total productivity. It's used as food by many animals, notably the large sea mammals, whales. The study of living things, biology, woke me up in 9th grade to wanting to learn. But then I had thought algae were only one-celled and gathered together to make that interesting but yucky green stuff in ponds. I didn't think the word algae could apply to a giant kelp that could be growing to 46 meters long, but it does. Before we leave this picture from the 1974 issue of National Geographic, let me read a part of the caption. Shag rug of sea wrack drapes the Maine coast at low tide on a summer day. Dominant racks could be either Ascophyllum nodosum or Fucus fasciculosus. Both trap enough moisture to protect many creatures that would otherwise not survive in low tide. Reddish rhodomedia in the pool is locally used as chewing gum. Rhodomenia, as you'll see later, is the old genus name for dulse and is descriptive of its color. The latest genus name is descriptive of its shape, Palmaria. Our gardens and as foods as medicine, Dr. Jim Duke reminds us, our genes are bound to recognize and require elements of our original nutrition. Undersea plants are the oldest living flora of the earth. It's funny that we've come to consider eating them as strange or exotic. For instance, if we do at all, we may only eat them when we're at ethnic restaurants or as unusual snacks at friends' parties. But now that's not a bad way to start. Our soil and our bodies tend to run out of substances agriculturalists, chemists, and nutritionists have names for. Iodine, manganese, copper, fluoride, zinc, and vitamins A, B1, B2, 3, B6, and B12. Also vitamin C and E, and maybe it's not all that novel to note that they are all there in the so-called weeds of the sea. If we live on or near an ocean coast, we are more likely to see some seaweed. Surely when we visit the beach of an ocean, we see it and we feel it if we're beach walkers or combers. Oh, I have to admit that as a kid I tried tasting some of this stuff. Have you ever? If so, we probably never should do it again with all the pollution we hear about. As we saw earlier, this washed up stuff goes by the common names sea wrack, rockweed, and knotted wrack. And they are interesting marine algae. The first you come to from the left is a seaweed traditionally used at New England clam bakes, air bladders that act as ocean floats to keep the plants within reach of sunlight, act as steamers, and contribute to what is said to be a sweet, savory, salty flavor to foods. And the knotted wrack is one of the principal sources of algin, a gelatinous substance used as a thickener in canned soups and as an emulsifier in ice cream and salad dressings. It's a gelling agent in puddings, gelatins, and jellies, and it's made into thin films that are used as edible sausage casings. Wow, foods made with seaweed are likely to be on the menus of Asian restaurants we visit. Miso soup, vegetable or chicken broth-based seaweed soup, sushi wrapped in pressed sheets of seaweed called nori. I imagine many of you know how to make sushi now. Even people who would never consider eating seaweed often know that it has a long history of use as an animal fodder and garden fertilizer. Doesn't it make sense that it can replenish not only the nutrients that the land plants use up, but also those that run off our property to the streets and streams, rivers, and bays, and finally the ocean? I thought there was a movie called Green Fields set on the coast of Ireland that features this usefulness. It had a story, but all I remember was the farmer who had the best crops in town prepared his soils by dragging seaweeds up from the beaches to his fields, where he worked them into his gardens. Here we see the garden of Michigan members Jane and Lee Taylor's daughter Kristen, who we thank for these slides of seaweed in Kettle Cove, Maine. Seaweed products for the garden and compost bin are available in the forms of powders and tablets and flakes and concentrated liquids. In 1989, I ordered and began using Seaborn Liquid Seaweed Plant Nutrient and Soil Conditioner, and also kelp meal, potting soil additive, and garden mulch. Well, I always got a kick out of the fact that the address was Charles City, Iowa, about as far from an ocean as one can live. Well, they say that seaweed amendments contain a wealth of trace elements and organic compounds that stimulate root development, improve soil and nutrient uptake, increase overall plant vigor, and help plants resist diseases and insect stress. add directly to your water can, soil, or compost pile. Let's refer to the seaweeds that are edible and eaten as staple foods by people all around the world as sea vegetables. I counted 18 cultures mentioned as having traditional diets that include edible sea plants. It's not as though they eat a lot at one time every day. A little here and there is enough. People who know me well know that I live by the broadest definition of an herbal plant. To me, an herb or a herb is any plant that has been, is being, or might become useful to humankind. What then is the definition of a weed? Some say the word connotes a plant that is useless and wild. When talking about land or garden plants, it's any plant that's growing where you don't want it to. And vegetable, the dictionary says a vegetable is a plant found in wild or cultivated, or plant is cultivated for an edible part or parts. It's tamed in every day, the dictionary says. Can we then say herb useful, weed not useful, at least where it is, vegetable, wild, or cultivated, edible? Herb Society members are familiar with this definition of an herb, and there are annual and perennial sea vegetables, and they are valued historically, presently, and potentially for their flavor and flavor-enhancing qualities. What's that ume thing? Not so much for their fragrance, ooh, definitely. For their medicinal qualities, however, not so much for their insecticidal uses, but yes, economic or industrial uses. And I Googled the possibility, and sure enough, there may be natural alternatives for hair dyes from seaweeds. We will list the link, and we have in our handout. Bordering the east coast is a shelf of shallow water, home of many tiny sea creatures and the source of a rich fishing industry. See how protected the Gulf of Maine is from the Gulf Stream from the south. Maybe this shows why the main sea vegetable suppliers seem to be safer from pollution. Providers of my sea vegetables adhere to the principles of sustainable harvesting in undeveloped, remote islands, away from boat traffic in the wild, rocky bottom, open sea of the Gulf of Maine, where southwest winds prevail. Some sea vegetables are heavily cultivated in Japan and China. They are seeded on ropes and nets. But providers of my sea vegetables work out of the towns of Franklin and Steuben, have state permits, adhere strictly to organic standards set by international certifiers in all harvesting and handling procedures, and they go to the expense of periodic laboratory testing. Experienced harvesters gather sea vegetables from spring through summer in intertidal zones and associated areas of regular sea spray at the peak of desired nutrition. They are most accessible at low tides after new or full moons. Doesn't that make sense? Sea vegetables are tenacious, flexible, and adaptable, but have prime maturity dates for edibility and cleanliness. They do best in cold, icy waters. August is too hot. By that time, the plants are sun-bleached, covered with secondary plant and animal growths, they like them to, and are full of snail holes. The autumn windstorms and winter blizzards cure whatever ails the plants, and in January, new plants regenerate in response to the lengthening days. Algae are the most widespread of living things and among the hardiest. The clear tropical waters, scientists have found seaweeds growing at depths greater than 600 feet But in less transparent temperate waters, most plants live within 150 feet of the surface. In the waters around California's Santa Catalina, the giant kelp is common in depths to about 60 feet. So algae grow in the perpetual ice and snow of the polar regions, in near boiling hot springs, and in brine lakes 10 times saltier than the sea. They even live in deserts where they can survive indefinitely on traces of dew, and they spring into new growth when the raindrops fall, like those frogs we see on the nature programs. 3 plant groups called phyla contain what most people call seaweeds: chlorophyta, green, the phaeophyta, brown, and the rhodophyta, red. In general, color can help identify them, but it's not infallible because color may vary according to habitat and the well-being of the plant. All 3 seaweed groups contain green photosynthetic pigments called chlorophyll, and usually xanthophylls, yellow, or carotenes, orange as well. The brown and red algae just have additional amounts of yellow, orange, or red that give hues of olive or purplish green. Pigmentation is associated with the presence of minerals. Well, let's peruse this beautiful calendar page created by the collaboration of the New York Botanical Garden and British Natural History Museum for better renderings of the morphology. First, look at the top, left, and right, and we see typical coastline habitats. You'll be seeing alaria and dulse, horsetail kelp or kombu, Atlantic kombu, sugar kelp and sweet rack, wild Atlantic nori, Irish moss, and we've talked about and you've seen sea racks and rockweeds already. This is my silly little diagram. The whole plant is called an algal thallus. The part of the plant that resembles a leaf is the frond or blade. A bladelet corresponds to the leaflet of a land plant. The stipe is approximately equivalent to the stem of other plants. Spore-bearing lobes or leaf-like structures may be present, such as these on alaria that you saw before. This is a little larger view. They're called sporophylls. And the holdfast is the point of attachment, usually to a rock, but sometimes to a mollusk or a crab. It lacks the more complex function of true roots. There's no exchange of water or nutrients through the holdfast. Nutrients can be taken up and exchanged by diffusion and active transport directly across all surface of the thallus. Carbon dioxide and oxygen are also assimilated and released in this way. The sea vegetables with which I am most familiar are brown and red. I've been learning to use them since 1973. A hysterectomy helped me to decide to take better care of myself, and I took some nutrition classes, as Karen said, based on the traditional Asian diet of rice, vegetables, and a smaller amount of protein. The main seaweed company was probably listed in the back of a book as a good source for edible seaweed. I can't remember, but I never was able to get them in any store, except I think the macrobiotic classes told us here and there. In fact, they may have sold them to us. 20 years ago, I've been ordering these from Maine Seaweed Company for at least 30 years, and 20 years ago I talked my husband into going to Maine to try to find them. Well, guess what? The only time we could get away from work was August. The harvest was in and all dried. Only one person was there, and we were lucky to find the place at all. It's a small mom and pop type business. No sign to guide anyone there. They were very remote and private. But now they are welcoming visitors, prospective workers, and those who wish to have a working, playing retreat. The National Geographic legend to this picture says, "Except for the use of outboard motors, neither the equipment nor techniques of harvest have changed much since 19th century artist Haizan Hirasawa depicted the Ainu, bearded aborigines of Japan, collecting seaweed off Hokkaido." Here is Larch Hansen, the Maine seaweed's main man. He sent this postcard as a holiday greeting one year. I thought this was as close as I imagined I would ever get to seeing him harvest, although he did say he has a kid-sized wetsuit ready and waiting for me. What I mean is Larch has now posted videos of the process of harvesting on the Maine Seaweed Company website. You can see it. Maybe we could have a future conference near there. Well, perhaps this is a good place to address the question of salt and trace elements. If we're smart, we've been cutting back on excessive use of table rock salt for years. Many minerals give sea vegetables their salty taste, potassium as well as sodium. Of course, they vary among the different species. We do need some dietary sodium. Sea vegetables provide the most organic, balanced sodium available at low levels per serving. A light rinse before use lessens the salty taste, and I have to say, consult your dietary counselor with further questions. Elements such as iodine, chromium, manganese, copper, and zinc are called trace minerals because only small amounts are necessary for good health. Well, how to begin to introduce yourself to sea vegetables? Being here is a good start, and I have 5 suggestions. Number 1, try some snacks and seasoning mixtures that have bits of nori or kelp in them. It is said that sea vegetables contain a more complete and complex salt. Number 2, go slowly, drink plenty of liquids, decrease your intake of harsh table salt, buy sea salt and add it only in cooking, never or rarely at the table. Number 3, if you run across a package of one of these, buy it and follow the directions. Number 4, try sea vegetable items at ethnic and savvy gourmet restaurants. Number 5, remember dried sea vegetables do have concentrated nutrients. Only 1/4 ounce or less per serving is recommended, and using a variety over a period of months is advised for maximum nutrition and taste. Now to the plants. I have 5 or 6 favorites with which I am most familiar. Alaria esculenta, wild Atlantic wakame. I'll show you views of 2 different orders that came in the mail to me. This plant is similar to Asian wakame, the standard sea vegetable for miso soup. Unlike some wakame, it has not been blanched in boiling water prior to drying. Alaria is an olive brown perennial, 6 inches wide and up to 12 feet long, having a prominent midrib. It's the one we've seen that has the spatula-shaped sporophylls on the stipe below where the frond grows. Regrowth is valued, so wading out at lowest tide is preferred. The stipe is cut with a sickle just below the frond, leaving 3 or more feet of stipe to regenerate a frond for next year, and you'll see that on those harvesting videos. It's harvested best in late spring for high vitamin C, late winter to late spring for vitamin 12, and midwinter for vitamin K. In whales, Alaria fronds are stripped down to just the center midrib and sold as fresh, salty carrot heart. Alaria is delicious, added to rice and barley or millet. Added to beans, such as pintos, garbanzos, or lentils, it will impart a rich gravy texture and help make the beans digestible. Alaria will yield a satisfactory food gel for home gelatin making. There are 3 laminary kelps available. When I order the family pack assortment, I never know which I will be sent. It depends on the harvest. Laminaria digitata, finger kombu, or horsetail kelp. It's easy to identify. It's an olive tan annual about 12 inches wide and 24 inches tall, and prefers rocky sea bottoms, exposed locations, and cold currents. Its stipe is very tough when dried, and at one time it was used as handles for knives and other tools. It's a major source of algin. Remember, that's the gelatinous substance used commercially for thickening, emulsifying, and stabilizing all kinds of foods and beverages. Digitata is high in iron and iodine and is used as a cooked vegetable to help cook other vegetables and in making soup stock. It's very similar to Japanese kombu shown in the background here. Laminaria longicruis. Longicruis means long-legged. The Peterson Guide calls it hollow-stemmed kelp and oarweed. It's also olive tan, but has a long hollow stipe, and an elongated, broad oar-like blade, which grows from 3 to 6 yards long. A very common kelp found in quiet, shallow to deep waters, near or below the low tide mark. Best harvested in early spring with a knife or sickle, considered to be the best sea vegetable for all-around use. I've only used it as I've used the others in other foods, but, in cooking, yes, use the others in other foods, but cooks say that it can be roasted, fried, pickled, boiled, sautéed, marinated, and eaten by itself as a side dish. I haven't drawn a diagram of Laminaria saccharina. As you saw on the floral calendar, it's very ruffled. It's commonly known as sugar kelp or sweet rack. They say it exudes a sugar alcohol, which dries as sweet crystals, which is dusted on chewing gum, remember that? And bitter pills. Young plants are eaten raw or cooked. This kelp lives for 3 years, but sporophytes are produced year-round. It is harvested in late spring for high vitamin C. Complete regeneration of a frond is possible only when the plants are less than a year old, and they are somewhat fragile and must be moved quickly to a warm, dry area for drying to avoid bacterial decay. So this is the most delicate, perhaps because they have such a high gel content. Mature plants are gathered for just that reason and used in cosmetic creams, hair products, water softeners, and dental impression gels. Rhodamenia, or our most recent accepted name, Palmaria palmata, dulce. The red rose to reddish purple fronds of dulce grow from 6 to 6 inches tall. They have a tiny disc-shaped holdfast and a short stipe and grow on rocks, shells, and other algae from the mid to below low tide mark on the rocks. They're high in vitamin A in mid to late summer, high in vitamin C from early to late fall. In general, dulce is famous for its high protein and iron content. Large Hansen says dulce is a summer plant, but best harvested in protected, shady crevices. 1 50-pound bushel of wet dulce dries to only 5 pounds. The dried fronds are eaten out of the package as a chewy snack or in salads or sandwiches. it was used, as I mentioned before, as a chewing gum by the locals. As is or roasted, dulse is easily cut into soups, stews, and stir-fries. It's complementary to most potato and cheese dishes. It's good with fresh fruit and salad greens or blended into smoothies. My friends from Virginia who have since moved to Maine held my ankles while I dangled over the cliff when I saw this good example of the layering of sea vegetable habitats. Well, I recently found this shared diagram on the internet. Note the splash zone and the seasonal tides, the splash zone, and these tide levels. Marine algae choose favorite locations, and harvesters find them at depths where they are most accessible at low tides after new or full moons. Here we go to nori. Porphyra umbilicus, purple laver or wild Atlantic nori, is also high in protein. Unprocessed nori is brownish purple to olive. My drawing should not be so pinky red. It's small and narrow when young, large, broad, circular, bending and wavy when mature with a rounded base. The edges are whole or lobed. It's thin, soft, but rubbery in texture when freshly harvested. Now Larch says the best plants hang from the undersides of boulders with their free parts in water. Laver, or Atlantic nori, is easy to dry in the sun from May to September. Eat it as it comes from the harvester. It can be chewed like dulse. This is Japanese nori, processed into sheets, which you've seen before. Lightly roasting enhances the flavor and tenderizes all noris. They are great crumbled into soups, on grains, salads, and popcorn. Congress crispus, Irish moss. It's good to use in cosmetic creams, and I made a burn solution one year for the International Herb Association conference. Dark red-purple to greenish white and only 2 to 4 inches high. So sweet. Irish moss forms loose to dense clumps. It's a favorite food of sea urchins. As you can see here, there are several blades branching on a single holdfast. Best raked by hand at low tide from small boats or by wading in shallows in spring and summer, the latter for vitamin C, and dried on net racks. Irish moss is a famous major source of carrageenan, a gum used for gelling, thickening, emulsifying, and stabilizing various processed foods. Carrageenan. It's also used for clarifying wines and beers, and occasionally used as a vegetable in soups and stews. Well, during my macrobiotic classes in the 70s, I learned about 2 also delicious Japanese sea vegetables. Hijiki having round spaghetti-like fronds, and arame, squarish threads. After being popular for 30 years, I see on the internet there is a caution against consuming hijiki. We'll look into that. The only sea vegetable product I've ever seen that is close to green is blue-green spirulina. I've seen it in expensive little power drinks, and I bought a bottle of it at the co-op to experience it in fruit drinks. This top right panel shows its blue-greenness a little better. The reference I use most for edible foods, a big paperback called Cornucopia, it's listed on your handout, says spirulina is traditionally collected and made into soups and cake-like foods by the inhabitants of Lake Chad in Africa and Lake Texcoco near Mexico City. It is suitable for culturing as a food supplement, and I guess that's what the people that make these products do, use it as a food supplement. I am a simple person who likes being moderately busy. In general, the following is how I store and use sea vegetables. They all vary from order to order. I usually order a family pack assortment every year, but remember, I give samples away to friends, herb study groups, and master gardener trainees. I store them in large bags in the large box they come in, only separating out or cutting handfuls into other containers, sometimes brown glass, to keep in the kitchen cupboard. I store the large box that they come in a dry, dark place, which is an unheated attic in the winter and a cool basement when the attic starts to heat up during the spring to autumn. High temperatures and humidity facilitate the breakdown of vitamin C, but vitamin C is said to be 60% more stable in sea vegetables compared to 5% stability in land vegetables. In the kitchen, I scissor cut dry or soaked pieces of laminaria kelp and alaria into vegetable dishes, soups, and stews. You can cut soaked sea vegetables with a sharp knife on a cutting board, but sometimes things get pretty slippy slidey, so I really prefer kitchen scissors. When inspired, I get creative, or I go to a recipe book for ideas. Like yesterday, I wanted to see what cucumbers, what cucumber salads that would sea vegetables would go into them. So I went to a couple recipe books. Always soak and cook one of the kelps with dry beans. I cook a large pot of some kind of dry beans every week, sometimes every day, and freeze portions for later use. Dulse and nori are so delicate, they don't need soaking. I cut them into things I'm cooking or quickly dry roast them in a big iron skillet and crumble them onto salads and casseroles. They can be held over a candle or a gas flame for a few seconds for a crispy texture and a nutty flavor, or you can oven roast them at 200 degrees for several minutes, stirring them around and monitoring them carefully. Blanching sea vegetables by dipping them into boiling water or pouring boiling water over them in a sieve maintains a higher vitamin A content. Nothing goes to waste. If I have soaking water I can't use at the moment, I save it in the refrigerator for soup stock. If it becomes questionable before it gets used, it waters plants or the compost pile. I think we know what algin is, but have you heard of agar-agar? It's the same thing, I think, but processed to powder, flake, or solid bar form. It's defined as a mucilaginous material prepared from certain marine algae and used as a medium for bacterial culture. I remember it from microbiology class in college. It's used as a laxative and for thickening certain foods. These agars are sold as a vegetable alternative to gelatin obtained from bovine hoofs. Marine algae called seagrass and spinach of the sea, as well as seaweed. You can buy them, and we did. We bought these grass jelly products at an Asian grocery, and we didn't like them so much. They just seemed to be gelatin cubes sitting in sugar water. And as far as instant sea vegetable products, yuck. No, never again. Kelp products abound, and I think I first tasted powdered kelp as a seasoning at a commune potluck in the 60s. I didn't much like it then, and I don't much like it now. I like the idea of it, but Some other thing I learned in my macrobiotic classes was about gomasio, spelled with a H or not. It is fun to make. It's a sesame salt seasoning often offered as an alternative to table salt. And I'm told that goma is Japanese for sesame and shio means salt. But crumbled roasted nori or dry dulse can go into the suribachi, a Japanese grinding bowl, to be ground first, and then 1 part salt to 16 more or less parts of freshly roasted, unhulled sesame seeds are added and ground to taste. I've made it many times alone or with other dried homegrown herbs. It's a great activity for a workshop. Pass around a large suribachi for each person's elbow grease, and then each get a portion of the finished product to take home in a bottle, which they have brought with them. Well, this shows how I make herb alcohol rub for external use only. Laminaria, kelp, and of course aloe are 2 of the herbs that I cut into it. But I would use any sea vegetable of which I have an abundance. Well, thank you for tuning in, and I'm willing to answer questions here or by emailing me at herbalarts@gmail.com. And thank yous also to Karen Kennedy, HSA Headquarters Educator, Dava Stravinsky, HSA Education Chairman, and Director Katrinka at HSA Headquarters for allowing me to commune with one of my favorite herbal subjects again. Thank you so much.
Well, Pat, we thank you because this was a great introduction and even beyond an introduction to sea vegetables and learning more about them. I want to mention that the handout that you mentioned is available on our website in the webinar section for people to download and print if you would like. It includes a lot of information and a bibliography as well. One comment thanking you, and one question asking for your email address one more time. So,
right. Okay. Herbal Arts. It's just Herbal Arts, one word, HERBALARTS @gmail.com.
All right, terrific. Any other questions? We'd be happy. We have a few minutes for those. One question is, do you have a favorite book, Pat, that you would recommend on this subject?
Oh my goodness. I've over the years, from the simplest that I first had, the Peterson Guide started me, but Edible Sea Vegetables of the New England Coast is a forager's guide with recipes from the Maine Seaweed Company. And this is just a little paperback that they enclosed one time when I asked for something years and years ago. And then, my golly, just every year seems to come out with a new book about seaweeds. And so I did list all my favorites. So please go to that handout. The latest was that Oleg Moritzyn's book, and it goes into the science. So I was amazed. Every year it gets better.
And more books are listed in your bibliography in your handout as well.
Right. Right.
Good source for books. Lots of kudos to you coming in. Lots of comments saying that this is amazing and very interesting. So thank you again, Pat, for sharing your knowledge with us. I think it's one of those topics that takes a number of years to really begin to experience and synthesize and work through something that is pretty foreign to a lot of us, particularly those of us who've been quite inland for most of our lives.
Right, right. And me from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Oh my goodness. Well, most people say, oh, yuck. But you know, everybody that sits with me at lunch at conferences sometimes gets to have a communion piece of nori. So seek me out every conference.
There's a little tip for next year there and everybody. Well, Pat, thank you so much. At this point, we have no more questions, so I think you have done a great job with the topic. And the recording for this presentation will be available on our website in the next couple of weeks as we get it processed. And watch our website for more information about our next webinar. It'll be available soon. And thank you all for joining us.
It's wonderful.
Thanks, Pat. Bye-bye.
You're very, very welcome.